What is the reason for wearing a gartel? When does one wear a gartel?
First of all, the halachic concept of a gartel, the nigla concept of a gartel, is shelo yehei li b'reyes ha'erva. That means that when a person says a davar shebekadusha, a person davens or learns or does any mitzvah, his heart is not to be able to see the erva. The erva means the nakedness, the part of the body that has to be covered. Which means to say, if you're wearing, let's say, a nightshirt, a nightgown, and you're not wearing anything underneath, even though your body is covered, you cannot say davar shebekadusha because the heart can see the erva. And there's to be a girdle that separates the upper part of the body from the lower part of the body. That's the halachic concept of a gartel. Of course, today that's not necessary because everybody wears pants or underwear, so automatically ein li b'reyes ha'erva. This is a practical halacha. A person is laying in bed and they're covered completely, but underneath the blanket they're not wearing any clothing, or they're not wearing anything which would separate the upper part of the body from the lower part of the body. They're not allowed to say davar shebekadusha because li b'reyes ha'erva. That's a din. So that's a level of a gartel which is pashut again halacha. And as I've said many times, I am not a Rav, and I'm very, very uncomfortable being put in the position to say things that are halachic. So anybody who heard what I said, who has issue with it, please check it up in Shulchan Aruch, and you'll know how to do it and what to do, and whether I'm correct or I'm incorrect, and so on. So where does the gartel come in now that we're wearing pants, and we're wearing belts, and we're wearing underwear, and so on? And the answer to that question is that there's a din, there's an idea of getting yourself ready for davening. Which means to say, even if you're completely tzniistic and properly dressed and you're appropriately clean, you want to do something specific as a preparation for davening. That's why you put on a hat, a second covering. And for the same reason, we wear a gartel. And the gartel is an extra girdle, which we put on to harness ourselves a second time in our preparation for davening. Now, what's interesting, and this is really interesting, really interesting, and it reveals how little we understand about what's transpiring. When the Rebbe became a Rebbe, when our Rebbe became a Rebbe, in the very beginning, the Rebbe said that there were two things he doesn't understand about Lubavitch. The first one is, how come boys do not put on the Rebbe Tamt film as soon as they become bar mitzvah? The tradition was they put on the Rebbe Tamt film when they got married, when they got engaged. In many Chassidic communities, a bacher wears only one pair of tefillin, and when he gets married, he puts on the Rebbe Tamt film in Chassidic communities. And the Rebbe said it doesn't make sense to him. If you're going to wear the Rebbe Tamt film later, you might as well do it at the bar mitzvah. That idea, the Rebbe instituted slowly. At the beginning of the Rebbe's Nesius, Bacherim wore only Rashi tefillin, and they had to get the special dispensation, a special permission from the Rebbe to put on a Rebbe Tamt film. I know people who told me the Rebbe said put on a Rebbe Tamt film when you get engaged, when you get married. I know people who told me the Rebbe said put it on when you're 20 or 21, and even as young as 18. So the Rebbe was very personal. The Rebbe used to tell people you're not allowed to do without a shush. The Rebbe in fact objected because somebody told him that he started putting on a Rebbe Tamt film without the Rebbe's permission based on something that he heard or read that the Rebbe had said. And the Rebbe says you're not permitted to do it without the shush. And of course, 25 years into the Rebbe's Nesius, I think it was Lamed Vav, 1975, 76, something like that, the Rebbe announced all boys from Bar Mitzvah should start putting on a Rebbe Tamt film. The Rebbe made references to Kisvi Harizal, and I think a Kamarne, who says that today Rashi and Rebbe Tamt film is pushed halachic, and that every boy from Bar Mitzvah should wear a Rebbe Tamt film. And he said, no need to ask. So when he first became a Rebbe, he proposed the idea. 25 years on, he said, okay, now we're going to do it. And I once mentioned to an earlier point that much later the Rebbe actually encouraged Baruchim to start putting on a Rebbe Tamt film before the Bar Mitzvah yet, as soon as they start putting on a Rashi, which is the way it's done today. But the Gartel was the second thing. How come in Chabad we don't put on a Gartel or Bar Mitzvah? You look in any Chassidic community, a boy becomes Bar Mitzvah, he puts on a hat, he puts on a jacket, and of course in many of those communities they put on a long jacket, which Chabad used to wear in Russia, we no longer wear, and a Gartel. How come a bacher doesn't put on a gartel till he gets married? And the Rebbe never changed that. He could have. He changed the Rebbe Tamt film. And if you think about it, the idea that Bar Mitzvah Bacham should wear a Rebbe Tamt film is far more radical than Bar Mitzvah Bacham wearing a gartel. Because a gartel is a piece of string tefillin, it's a very serious thing. You have to have a gufnaki and to put on an extra pair, and especially according to Kabbalah, the Rebbe Tam is higher than Rashi. And this the Rebbe did institute, and this the Rebbe did not institute, which tells us we understand very little. There's actually a commentary from the Rebbe where he suggests that there's a relation between the Gartel and the Talis, but it is odd that two things that Rebbe was curious about at the beginning of his Nesias, the more controversial thing on the surface he instituted, and what is arguably far less controversial he never did institute. But there's two more details that I want to say. Number one, the Rebbe used to encourage Bachrim. He actually told the Bachrim that when they go into Yechidus to the Rebbe, they should put on a Gartel. When the Bachrim came from Russia, the Rebbe told them that when they go into Yechidus, put on a Gartel, but it should be inconspicuous. They should put it on under their jacket. So when Bachrim went to Yechidus to the Rebbe, they always put on a Gartel. And of course, this applies now when boys go to the Oyel. When you go to the Oyel, you put on a Gartel. That's number one. And number two, when non-Chabad people would challenge the Rebbe and say, "How come Bachrim are not wearing Gartel? It doesn't make any sense. It's a tradition by Chassidim. You put on a Gartel." And again, the Gartel that we wear is not halachic in terms of libedei erva. It's in terms of hiken lekrasa lekecha yisrael. Before you do a mitzvah to prepare yourself, how come I don't wear a Gartel? So the Rebbe said, you go to the mikveh, you'll see every Lubavitcher Bachur is already wearing a Gartel. And the Rebbe was referencing the bendel, the string that we wear around our tzitzis. And the reason we wear the string around our tzitzis is because we want the tzitzis to remain fully stretched out, because of this tzitzis wrinkle, then we don't have a shear. And the Rebbe indicated that he sees that as some form of a Gartel, and on some level at least, it takes the place of the Gartel.